family. We often think of family as this like safe haven, this place full of unconditional love and support. But what happens when that's not the case? When those closest to you, become a source of pain and betrayal? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at today as we deep dive into this podcast episode called When Family Becomes the Enemy.
Okay.
The host, we don't know his name, he takes us on this like really personal journey. He's 37 years old, and he shares his experience of, dealing with family betrayal, how he found resilience, and ultimately how he breaks free from this toxic environment.
Yeah, it's so interesting how, this story really shows us the difference between this like idealized view of family and the tough realities that people sometimes face.
Right, yeah. It reminds us that things aren't always, as they seem.
Right.
So in the beginning of the episode, the host talks about growing up with his 3 younger siblings and the loss of their mom on New Year's Eve in 1996. He was just a kid then.
Oh, wow. Losing a parent at such a young age, that's got to be so hard. There's the grief, of course, but there's also that loss of security and stability right when those things are so important.
Yeah, he talks about how it felt like his world completely shifted. Like everything he knew was suddenly gone.
Yeah.
After their mom died, he and his siblings went to live with their grandmother and aunts. And, at first glance, that might seem like, a natural and supportive move, right?
Yeah, for sure. The expectation is that extended family steps in,
Mm.
and provides that comfort and support.
Right.
But we see here that's not always how it goes.
Right. And instead of finding that solace, he talks about experiencing verbal and emotional abuse from these relatives. Like, imagine being constantly put down, called names, made to feel unwelcome, and all this after losing your mom.
Oh, that's awful. It makes sense that he would look for connection and belonging elsewhere. Everyone needs that.
Yeah.
And when those needs aren't met at home, especially during such a vulnerable time, the impact can be really, really damaging.
And even while going through all of this himself, he was still so concerned about his younger siblings.
Right.
He really stepped up, encouraging them to stay in school and trying to shield them from all this negativity he was facing.
His actions say a lot about his resilience and empathy. Even while going through his own trauma, he was focused on taking care of others.
It's both inspiring and sad because he talks about his siblings struggling with drugs and homelessness. It's like he's fighting his own battles, but also desperately trying to keep them from facing the same fate.
It's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone someone so young.
Right.
It just shows you the ripple effect trauma can have, how it impacts the entire family, even across generations.
Now, this is where things start to get really interesting.
Okay.
The host mentions discovering that his mother had left the house for her children.
Oh, wow.
This house, the symbol of her love, represents this glimmer of hope in this otherwise really difficult situation. But that hope is quickly met with conflict.
Yeah, the house becomes the central point of conflict in his story and ultimately leads to even deeper betrayal. It brings out all the tension and power dynamics that are happening in the family.
He tries to talk to his grandmother about the house, to just understand what's going on. But instead of getting answers, he's met with this hostility.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it becomes clear that there's more to this than we initially thought.
Often situations like this can expose unresolved issues and sometimes, unfortunately, greed.
Yeah.
It's like the house becomes this catalyst, bringing all these underlying tensions to the surface.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this physical space can be so symbolic.
Right.
It's not just a home. It represents all the complex emotions and dynamics within the family.
Yeah.
And as we'll see, this is just the beginning of the betrayal that he experiences.
And this betrayal isn't just a single event. It unfolds gradually through manipulation and a series of actions that ultimately tear the family apart.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to hear how those dynamics play out.
Well, one of the things he describes is how his grandmother starts manipulating his sister, turning her against him.
Yeah.
It's a classic example of what's called triangulation in dysfunctional families.
Triangulation. I've heard of that, but I never really understood it. What does that actually look like, in a family setting?
It's basically a tactic where one person manipulates another by bringing in a third party. So, like, instead of addressing the issue directly with the host, the grandmother tells the sister lies about him,
Okay.
creating conflict and distrust between them.
So it's like a divide and conquer strategy.
Exactly.
So the siblings can't unite and challenge her.
Right. And it lets the manipulator stay in control. They've created this dynamic where family members are pitted against each other. And unfortunately, the sister, she falls for it.
Oh, that's so sad. I can't imagine how painful that must have been for him, seeing his own sister manipulated against him.
It's a form of betrayal that can be incredibly damaging, and isolating. He's essentially being scapegoated, his actions misconstrued, and his intentions questioned. It really shows the power dynamics and manipulation that can exist within families.
And this manipulation, it doesn't stop there, right? It sounds like things escalate even further.
You're right. This is just the start of a long and painful journey for the host as he tries to navigate this web of betrayal and find a way to heal and move forward.
Wow. Okay. It's a lot to process, but I'm definitely hooked. I want to hear what happens next
hmm
and how he finds the strength to break free from this toxic environment.
Let's get into that next.
So last we heard, the host is realizing that his grandmother is manipulating his sister, driving this wedge between them. Did he ever try to like push back against this?
He did, yeah. He tried to reason with his sister, tried to explain the situation with the house, and reassure her that he wanted what was best for all of them. He even offered her the deed, emphasizing that it wasn't about him, it was about their collective well-being.
He offered the deed to his sister. I mean, that's a huge gesture, especially with everything else going on. What do you think made him do that?
It really shows his character, his genuine desire to take care of his siblings. He wasn't interested in fighting over possessions. He wanted to create a sense of security and stability for them, which was something that was really missing in their lives.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's clear that he was carrying so much responsibility, trying to be there for his siblings while navigating this incredibly complex and hurtful situation.
Absolutely. But, despite his efforts, his sister, influenced by grandmother's manipulation and maybe her own insecurities, chose to believe the made-up stories and reject his attempts at reconciliation.
Man, that must have been devastating. Like imagine trying to do the right thing, reaching out, only to be met with rejection and distrust from your own sibling.
It's got to be painful to feel like your efforts are not just unappreciated, but actively dismissed.
Oh.
And here it's even worse because it's all fueled by manipulation and lies.
So at this point, the host is dealing with grief, abuse, and now his own sister turning against them. Did he ever like feel like giving up? Was it all just too much?
He talks about feeling completely alone, betrayed by the people he tried so hard to protect. Imagine that emotional weight, constantly being undermined, having your intentions twisted.
It's like he was stuck.
Hmm.
If he confronts the manipulation, he risks alienating his family even more. But if he stays silent, he's basically allowing himself to be hurt over and over.
Exactly. And that internal struggle, that feeling of being trapped between loyalty and self-preservation is a big theme in his story. He's torn between wanting to stay connected to his family and recognizing that he needs to protect himself from their toxicity.
So what happens next? Does he break free from this cycle?
Well, years go by, and just when he thinks he's found some peace, his grandmother comes back. She demands the title deed to the house.
Oh, wow.
It's like a nightmare. Old wounds reopen and the cycle of conflict starts all over again.
It's incredible how these patterns of dysfunction can be so persistent,
Yeah,
how they can come back even after years of separation.
it really is.
It just shows how deeply rooted family dynamics can be, how hard it can be to break free from those ingrained roles and behavior.
Yeah, and to make it worse, the grandmother starts spreading rumors, claiming that he sold the house and kept all the money for himself. Another example of manipulation, what's called character assassination.
Character assassination.
Yeah, it's a tactic to discredit someone, isolate them from their support system.
Okay.
By spreading lies and rumors, the manipulator, they try to control how the story is told, make the target look bad.
Yeah.
In this case, it just reinforces the idea that he's the villain, the greedy one who's only looking out for himself.
So the grandmother is using the same tactics, manipulating the family to turn against him. But this time, it feels like the stakes are even higher.
Absolutely. The conflict escalates, and fueled by those rumors, his sister completely turns against him. Now he's seen as the bad guy. He describes feeling incredibly alone, betrayed by the very people he had tried so hard to protect and support.
It's heartbreaking to think about what he went through, all that effort to try to keep his family together, only to be met with such deep betrayal.
It speaks to the complexity of toxic family relationships, the impact they have on people. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are within our own families, the places where we expect to find love and acceptance.
So now he's facing years of accumulated hurt, Manipulation and betrayal.
Mm.
How did he react to this final blow? Did he give up?
Well, this is where things get interesting. Instead of falling back into those old patterns of trying to fix everything or appease everyone, he starts to think about walking away from his family completely.
Wow.
He realizes how emotionally exhausted he is, the toll it's all taken on his well-being.
That must have been a difficult decision to even consider. I mean, this is his family.
It was a tough one. He wrestled with guilt and the fear of being judged. But at the same time, he's starting to understand that sometimes you have to protect yourself, even if it means distancing yourself from the people you love.
It's a big realization, for
Mm.
sure. It shows that he's starting to put his own needs first, that he understands his own well-being matters.
Yeah, exactly. And that change in perspective, understanding that you have a right to protect yourself, that's a crucial turning point in his story.
So did he actually walk away?
Yeah.
And if he did, how did he do it? How did he manage to break free from those deep family ties?
That's what we're going to talk about next.
I mean, it takes a lot of courage to even think about walking away from family. Like, it goes against everything we're taught about loyalty and obligation.
Mm.
So what finally made him decide to do it?
I think it was a few things. He was emotionally drained from years of conflict and manipulation. He realized that every time he tried to fix things, it just got undermined. But I think most importantly, he started to understand that his own well-being was just as important as keeping those family ties.
So he realized that staying in that environment was actually hurting him more than it was helping.
Yeah, exactly. He describes it as reaching a breaking point, like a moment where he knew he had to make a change. And for him, that change meant creating some distance and focusing on healing.
It's interesting. He talks about it as this journey of self-discovery.
Right.
Like he's shedding those expectations and labels that his family had put on him,
Yeah.
and realizing that his worth wasn't tied to their acceptance.
That's so important when you're trying to break free from these toxic family dynamics. It's
Yeah.
about separating yourself from the roles that they've given you. Like in his case, they always saw him as the villain, the ungrateful one. By stepping away, he could redefine himself, on his own terms.
Yeah, it's like he's finally giving himself permission to let go of the past,
Yeah.
and embrace a future where he could just be himself.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective, going from trying to fix his family to focusing on his own growth, that's what let him move forward.
Yeah.
He realized that he couldn't control their actions, he couldn't change their behavior,
Right.
but he could control how he responded and who he chose to have in his life.
And that's where the idea of chosen family comes in.
Yes. He talks about finding comfort and connection with friends and supportive people who accepted him for who he was, not who his family tried to make him out to be. It shows that family isn't always about, blood ties.
Yeah.
It's about shared values, respect, and genuine care for each other.
It's like creating your own support system,
Exactly.
surrounding yourself with people who build you up, not tear you down.
Exactly. And he really stresses that walking away from toxic relationships doesn't mean you're not capable of love or that you're, heartless. It's about knowing your worth and setting boundaries to protect yourself.
So he made this really tough decision to walk away,
Yeah.
to prioritize his own peace. How did that change his life?
He talks about feeling the sense of relief,
Yeah.
like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders.
Yeah.
He was finally free from all the drama and emotional turmoil that had been, consuming him for so long. And that freedom, it gave him the space to rebuild his life, to create a future full of joy and real connection.
That's so inspiring to hear that he was able to heal and create a life that was truly fulfilling. It just shows how strong the human spirit can be.
It really does. His story reminds us that we get to decide what family means to us.
Yeah.
And sometimes our definition might not fit, what society expects or those traditional ideas about blood ties.
It's a good reminder that we have the power to choose who we let into our lives.
Right.
And to create a support system that helps us grow and feel good.
Absolutely. It was really brave of him to share his story, to be so open about what he went through. It sheds light on how complicated family dynamics can be and the challenges of dealing with betrayal and manipulation.
Right.
But it also gives us hope, showing us that it's possible to heal even from the deepest wounds.
I think that's a really beautiful way to put it. His journey teaches us about self-awareness, having the courage to set boundaries and choosing peace over obligation. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. How do you define family? And what can you do to to build relationships that are based on love, respect, and genuine support? It's an important question for all of us as we, navigate our own relationships and try to create a life that's full of joy, connection, and a sense of belonging.